And Tim Higgins here. So we're going to do something a little unorthodox again. Last time I said that, we talked about Python. This time, I'm going to show you something cool that I've been doing with Amazon, and we're going to talk about AI. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to do. Let's pull out our handy dandy notebook. And for those who know me, I'm old school. I like to have a notebook, right? Excuse me. And apologize. Good morning. It is Sunday morning. So we're going to see how quick we can get this done without wasting everybody's time. And let's see. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with an API. Well, not start with, but we have it. Let's back it up even further. Let's build out our architect here. So we have a Postman that's going to call an API, and that API is going to call a Lambda as a backend. And that Lambda is going to use AI to do some code generation for us. So it's really early and I need coffee, but let's see. That's going to be kind of our scope here. And we're going to cover some really cool features with Amazon. This is all going to be Amazon based, right? So with Amazon, we're going to, with APIs and Lambda, that is a definition of Lambda. That is the definition of serverless. Okay, that's kind of the new serverless. That's kind of a new term, right? But basically, in a nutshell, what it means is you don't really have to host a server. Amazon's going to do it for you. And this could be anything, right? It could be a database backend. This could be middle tier. Right now, we're only focused on the front end, which is our API layer. And technically, it's not a front end, right? So really, this is going to be our middle tier totally. And then for the AI, we're going to talk about these models that are inside Amazon. So I'm not going to talk about pricing or how to get started in Amazon. So let's get started. So if you pull up your Amazon and you type in Bedrock, you're going to come to this page right here. And it always says get started, even though I've already started. But what we can talk about is these foundational models. Now, I'm not going to get too detailed. Again, you can Google all this. But there was a really good definition. Let's see. Don't take my word for it, right? Let's just go to Google. And I guess I could have just did it in the search bar, right? Sorry, again, like I said, it's Sunday morning, so sometimes I'm kind of slow with my thinking. Let's do Amazon foundation models, because what it does is Amazon got smart, and they're basically starting points for your AI. Here we go. So it's basically these companies that Amazon's partnered with that allows you to help use their models so you don't start from scratch. And that's really, really important. So what I would do is, if you want to know more, I don't want to make this a 5-hour video, right? Just do what I did, search for Amazon foundation models, and this will tell you all about it, okay? Now, the biggest thing is about this video is not so much mimic what I did, but understand what I did so you can do it yourself. So with these foundation models, like I said, Amazon partnered with a lot of companies, their APIs for base models that you can use. And if I go back to Bedrock, I can see them right here. Now we're going to focus on this one. This is the one that I've been using the most. The reason we're going to focus on it is, number one, my opinion, it meets my needs, and you may want to use these other ones as well. But if you also do any research on them, you'll see that Amazon paid a lot of money to help them. Therefore, they're almost partnered with Amazon fully. So they're, my opinion, are going to have some of the best features and some of the best attention from Amazon. We're talking about the Claudia here. Let's see what we get when we go to their page. So just go to, yep. So this will tell you all about it, and we're going to focus on a summit, right? But this will tell you everything about it. It's really cool. Again, spend the time to research these. Just don't do what I was going to say, just don't do what I do. Just don't watch my video and mimic it like on some of the TDM things. It's cool to do that, but this is more of an understanding type thing, okay? So let's go ahead and close that. And of course, you can go to Claudia itself. So if we actually go and get the actual name, and we just Google this, and this will tell you even more about it. And you can obviously do stuff here as well that's outside of Amazon, but our focus today is Amazon, okay? So let's close these browsers, and let's go back over here. And we're going to be looking at these a lot, so don't worry about that. We'll just leave that tab up in case we need it. But some of the cool things you can do here right away is there's examples that you can use. There's like just a lot of really good stuff just on this one page right here. So again, if I click on Claudia, maybe I should make this big because this is a video. I want you to see the whole thing. So I clicked on Claudia. And again, I'm going to focus on the Summit 3 here, or the 3 Summit. And it gives you examples of how to access the API, which is super cool. Because remember I said these are just APIs that have partnered with Amazon to help you get your model started. Now, this isn't your custom model. This is kind of a model that they're using. Now, maybe later I'll show you how to integrate your model into this. But right now, we're just going to focus on what's here that we could use, okay? The most important thing, too, is they have these playgrounds, which is really cool. Because you can come over here, you can select a model, and you can actually do stuff with this. And again, I'm not going to talk about pricing, but it is fairly cheap. One thing I do want to talk about are these configurations, but we'll get to those in a few minutes. I don't want to overwhelm you. So if we go back to the overview, again, these are our models. This is the Claudia, okay? And I was trying to pronounce the name, but it's really early. Anthrop. And again, you can open the playground as a chat, which is really cool. They do have this Bedrock Studio, which I haven't touched yet, but there's a lot of stuff that you can do through here, like even safeguards. Maybe I don't want my customers to type in what is Tim's top secret guitar, right? So I can block that. You can create knowledge bases, which is really cool because then it can search through those knowledge bases, which I do plan to do that. And then the playgrounds, there's a chat, a text, and an image. Now, if I go to examples, and again, we're going to focus on code gen. So we'll just say code generator. Nope, if I can spell it again. There we go. I'm just going to grab this word because it's really early for me. Even though I get up at like 5, I'm not really focused on doing a video. We're just going to steal this so Tim can stop misspelling it. But here are some examples. Now, this one does an HTML response. I noticed I don't have access to this model, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes to do this. But that's okay, because that's not what we're going to do anyway. This will prompt the user, and it will give them a task, and it will write this out. These other ones, I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't even look at them. So, but the cool thing is, if you notice, this is in Python. Yay, that's what we're going to focus on, because we're Python people. At least I am. And then let me show you some things up here. So model. So this is, I clicked on the model access, and again, this is a video. It's going to kind of bounce for a second just till I get my bearings put in place. But when I said I didn't have access, you kind of do. But if I go down here, this is one where we're thinking about the Anthrop, and it's very important too to know your region. Notice not everything is in every region. So if I picked a region that isn't supported, or if I live in a region that isn't supported, then I'm not sure how you're going to do that. So you want to stick with something that's very simple. We're picking East Coast. I could pick East Coast Ohio or West Coast, but I'm okay with East Coast. Most things we do is in there anyway. But if you notice, this one is available to request. And this is just text and vision, right? This is text. So these I have access to, and I'm okay with that because that's what I'm going to use is this one right here. But again, if I go back to the examples, some of those you'll click on and it says, you don't have access to do this one. So you request the access. But at the same time, is it really that important if you're just looking at examples? Oh, what's going on, Amazon? Did I click too much? Is it really that important if you actually go in there and pick those, right? So probably not. So we're going to go back to this foundation model, which we haven't looked at yet. And I said I'm probably going to focus on Claudia 3, which is over here. I'm sorry. In here, I can see that things like this, and you can change this, right? So right now I picked on Claudia, but you can pick the other ones to see what it does. So if I look at this first one, this is a text model. So it's kind of that question answering type thing, which is what we want. So text generation, at the end of the day, code is just really text, right? And conversational, which means I ask it a question, it responds. That's great. But it also does complex reasoning and analysis. That's really cool. And then if I go over here to this one does images to text and chat optimization. So you want to pick the right model that works for you. Again, I said 3. We'll probably do 3.5. But again, code generation. So it's already kind of built into that model already. Text generation, complex reasoning, and analysis. That is super cool. So this is one we're going to start with. And I'm going to copy that because that's something important we probably want to come back to. So let's back up because I was kind of bouncing around. Again, just getting my bearings straight. But again, Amazon has these base models. Okay. So you go to Amazon, you type in Bedrock. You'll see Amazon Bedrock. I click on it. I'll click on Get Started. And from here, there's a lot of stuff I can do. Excuse me. If I click on the model here, I can learn more about it. That tells me a lot about the model. And here, I can click on each one of these. So we're looking at Summit 3.5. If I click on this one, this isn't 3.5. But one thing that's important too is if you notice these max tokens. So it does look at these tokens as, how much it supports. Now, 2,000 is a lot. Now, there's a whole thing over here of view pricing. And again, I said I wasn't going to talk about pricing, but again, you kind of need to know, but the tokens are sometimes not what you think. So if I go down to, say, price per model, let's go to here, on-demand pricing. So we're looking at here. See how cheap that is? I mean, that's pretty cheap. But if you notice, this is per 1,000 tokens, okay? So that's input tokens, output tokens. So basically question and answering. So that's per 1,000. Now, there's a little thing out there. Let me see if I can find it real quick that can help you figure out these tokens. Okay, so I went to look for, because I paused the video. If you go to platform openai.com, they have this tokenizer. So in here, I can say, what is my, let's do, who is the best guitarist in rock? Okay. And of course, I'm going to spell that. But I can see that's only 7 tokens with 33 characters. Okay. Each of these colors is a token. But what if I did space? There's another token. What if I did enter? What guitar does he or she play? Now, most importantly is some of these will be split into 2. 1, 2. And especially if it's, I don't know. Let's see. Yeah, so butterscotch, I don't know why I came up with that word, but I was thinking of something that had, multiple syllables. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's 19 tokens. So my point is tokens may not be exactly what you think, but still, we're talking about a lot here. So 2,000, so we're good. The other thing too is we want to make sure, notice all the language it specs. I mean, it supports, I didn't pay attention to that. But most importantly, you want to make sure that your model's attributes can do the things that you're trying it to do. Now, we're going to talk about this API in a bit because we're going to come back to that. And here's some more resources that I didn't even look at. Here's even SDK. That's kind of cool. It's TypeScript, but that's okay. Oh, here's a Python SDK. That's kind of cool. I don't know what that gives us. There's a cookbook. Maybe I should look at that later too. Oh, well. So with saying that, let's kind of get started. I guess one thing important too that I totally forgot is when we save our Q&A, our code generator, we want the code to be saved. We forgot one most important thing, code generation. It's got to go somewhere, right? So we're going to save it to an S3 bucket. So we'll talk about how to do that too. So that's kind of cool. All right, so that's kind of our architect. So let's just get started. Let's go to what we want to do first is let's create our Lambda first because that's probably the most easiest. Let's go here. Well, I'm phrase that. It's not the easiest. If you notice, I built one the other day, so we're going to create a new one, and we'll call it. Let's see. I know I'm going to misspell this because it's early, but let's just grab this word because we want that in there somewhere. And I'm putting my name because I'm not the only one that uses this. Yeah, no spaces. Code generation. Maybe builder. How's that? Okay. And what runtime do we want? Now, I did Lambda. If you've never done this, we're doing from scratch. And there's blueprints, never seen it. But you could probably play with those. And we're going to stick with Python 11 on this one. And the rest of this, I think I'm okay for now. We'll talk about permissions in a few, because we have to make sure our permissions are good enough for actually for putting it into the S3 bucket. Okay, so let's go ahead and hit next. We can just give it a few minutes to start building. All right, and this, it gives us a boilerplate code. Now, I do not like this. It's good that it gives us something to start with, but this little playground, I figured out the other day, I forgot what it's called, but it really stinks. So it's best to actually open this up inside of your IDE and be able to copy it over. But let's talk about what you see here. So this is the Lambda. We'll talk about layers. The Lambda has to do something, right? So a Lambda is an event viewer, okay? Or an event system, at least that's the way I look at it. But it does have the little IDE here. I forgot what this is called, but maybe I'll think of the name and put it in there eventually. And if you notice, I'm using Python. There's a lot of different languages it supports. So that's kind of cool. So if you're not a Python person, that's fine. And of course, your layers, we'll talk about that in a few minutes, because layers kind of, they do exactly what they say. So they kind of build on top of each other. But later on, we'll have to upgrade our Bodo 3. We'll talk about that in just a few seconds. And upgrading that, we will have to do another layer. So with saying that, let's kind of get started with this piece, just so you can know what's going on. With saying that, looking at this, the Lambda has to have a handler, okay? But we also have to integrate with our model. So those are things we need to start with. So how do we want to start this? What I want to do is just bring this over into Python. Okay, let's just open Python. And I have one already that I did the other day. Obviously, I did this before I showed you how to do it. So we're going to start with a new project. And I guess that was one of my old locations. I kind of would rather have this just on my desktop, because then it's easier to see and manage. So let's just drop it on our desktop for now. And that's fine. We'll create a new folder. We'll call this AWS video. So I know which one it is. That way I can delete it afterwards. And we'll say open. And we're just going to call this AWS code gen. And the rest of this is okay. So we're going to say create. Oh, and notice I was using 3.11 as my Python interpreter here. Okay, so here I'm just going to not keep this fancy. We're not talking about Python, but let's just call this main, because this is our main one. Okay, now this is not an application. Okay, we're not going to run it here. We're only using this IDE, and then we're going to copy and paste it over here. So the first thing we want to talk about is Bodo 3. Bodo 3 is kind of it's your reference that you're going to use, but it's kind of the reference that does almost everything for us. And again, it's Bodo, so just type it in. And if you notice, go through here, there's a lot of things that you can do. And we're going to talk about a lot of this, because a lot of stuff I got from this, okay? I've never used the code example. That might have been useful. There is an S3. So see, it does interact with S3 buckets, which is cool. So let's just jump away from this. There's a way, one of these talked about getting the models. So I thought that was a search. Let's see what we find if we just do model. Get model. So that's going through the API. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that you can do. I probably need to spend more time in this. But what we're going to do is, because I've only been spending maybe a week in this, so it's still fairly new to me. But the point is, we're using Bodo 3, so let's go ahead and import that in. Well, the first thing we got to do is actually bring it in. So let's pull up our terminal here, and let's do pip install Bodo 3. I think that's all it is. Yep, that's it. Okay. Now, again, the Bodo is going to allow us to do S3, and it's going to allow us to connect to our model. So let's go ahead and import this in. And we also want to import our core, because that's going to allow us to do some things like configuration. Oops. Let's see, what else we're going to need? We're going to need some JSON. And we're going to need, let's go ahead and do a date and time, because we need to name our file something. So it's kind of good if we attack the date and time onto it. I'll start with a diff. So we're just going to call this generate gen code and Aws. Okay. And we're going to pass in a message. You'll understand this here soon. And we're going to pass in a language type. I don't think I want to do that. Let's put lang type. And then we want to output this as a string str. There we go. Okay. Sorry, that's the wrong one. There we go. And str. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. Now, with saying that, we need a prompt. Okay, prompt. Now, this part's very important that I spell it correctly. Prompt test. And with that model, is this big enough? Let me make it big enough so you can see it. It wants to start, first of all, let's put this in a better looking string. Okay, because this will allow us to have multiple like that, and that's F for format. And then what we want to start with is human. Now, if you go back and look at the examples, some of those want like text to be user. It's always good to have just a window open. So let me open this up. I didn't show you all this too, but that's okay. We don't care about that yet. So if I go back to my models, oh, that was Bedrock. I'm sorry, Bedrock. And if we look at our models, I don't know why it says get started. It always says get started. You know, I've been starting for a while now. And if you looked at some of the examples, so if we go down to just chat, maybe, some of these models want things like, oh, it's over here. That's an actual example. I don't want that. Up here. So if we do code gen, well, this one's fine. Because if you notice, this one should start with human. It does. But if I go down to another one, maybe this Facebook thing, notice it doesn't start with human. So those are things you need to be careful with. Just make sure that you start with what it's expecting. Like this is the code gen, so we'll go ahead and kind of mimic this one. Notice it starts with human. Okay. Why don't we just, and of course assistant. Why don't we just do this? It's not what I want, but let's just start with that. And it says the model too. So we're just going to minimize this. There's the reference. So I'm just going to talk about this as I do it, but just kind of notice what's here. So they have Boto 3. They create a client. The client is saying which region, and that kind of just creates the client. And then you tell it which model, and we're going to do this a little bit different. And then down here, you actually tie all that together. So I'm kind of being very vague on purpose because I want us to do it together. Over here, where is Python? Python? This is going to give me a starting point. So we have human, and mine's called prompt, but we can call it user message. That's fine. Okay, user message. And then here, let's say something like, we've got to start it with something. Code for. Now, the good news is we can grab this message, say it's smart enough. Code for message. Yeah, I guess we do want to say what type we want. No, because I think it can be smart enough and tell us. Code for, what do you want to say? Code for blah. Now, human. Write code for blah. Let's just keep it simple for now. And then we want the assistants to actually respond at some point. Because we can go back and always modify this. I just want to keep it stupid simple for now. You know what I'm saying? So, and then our assistant is going to have something totally different. So let's grab assistants. Okay. And it's still within the same little block, okay? I'm after that to be a period. Oops, if I could period that. Again, the Mac's kind of in between my hands, so I make mistakes. So here, we want this to be, yeah, that's fine. We're good with that. Okay. So what we've got to do now is get rid of this. So this kind of works like a JSON type thing, right? Because we're calling it through an API. So it doesn't like that, but I don't really care. Now, and you don't have to do that either. You could just take that off, but you'll see where that comes into play later. It's just me defining a return type, but you really don't need that. Okay, let's just keep it Python happy. Here, we need a body because we're going to accept some JSON. So we'll call it body equals blah. And inside here, we need a prompt, right? Because that's our... Be patient with me as I think this through my head. And this one's going to be called user message. Okay. And then max, I'll talk about this in just a few seconds. Max tokens. So we did talk about the tokens. So I can say, give me max tokens here. Oops, sorry. Max tokens, what is it? Max tokens 2. Sample, and you'll see where that comes into play in a minute, and we'll make that one 248 because I think that's what the max was anyway. And then the temperature, I'm going to show you where I get all this in a few seconds, is 0.1, and then top K. Here, let's go look because I'm going to screw up if I don't. And this is not really something you want to screw up on. Amazon Bedrock. Get started. Claudia. Now, if you remember when I think they were in the playgrounds, let's do chat. And okay, so here it is. So sorry, you click on these down here. So this is, and let me hit info. So this is the temperature. Now, let me see if I can explain this to where it makes sense. Okay, so if we look at these and you want to know more about these, it's best to kind of know what they are in a way. So if what I did, I'm sorry, I probably did that way too fast, is I hit info, got the configuration up right here. And then if I right click and open, so a lot of this is just me kind of doing a lot of reading when I was going through this. Now this, if you read this, this says what these kind of are, right? What these settings are. And for randomness, for any given sequence, a model determines a probability distribution of options for the next token in the sequence. Okay, so that's kind of important, and that's your temperature. Well, technically it's all of them, but here the temperature affects the shape of the probability. Anyway, you can read this, right? So choose a lower value to influence the model to select a higher probability of outputs. Choose a higher value to influence the model to select a lower probability outputs. So what does that kind of mean? So if I put the temperature to 0, then it's going to be more likely that it's going to give me the exact same answer every time. So who is the best guitar player in the world? That would be Eddie Van Halen. If I set it to 1 and say who's the best guitar player in the world, then it's going to say Eddie Van Halen one time. It may say David Gilmour one time. So you kind of get it, right? So in the top K defines the cutoff where it no longer selects the words, right? So there's a lot of stuff here. You probably want to spend some time actually looking at this configuration, but when I went through this, it was kind of confusing at first, but you read it a couple of times, it starts making sense. So what you're trying to do is shape your model to say, hey, give me a good example of guitar players. So give me the top guitar players that play rock, and I want you to give me the top 10. The biggest thing is that you want to do here is kind of just understand how this influence works, okay? The randomness and the diversity of your model itself. So let's go ahead and get back to our code. So where are we? We're here. All right, and what were we doing here? So let's say, all right, so let's think about this. So, oh, that's where our temperature, right? Which I totally misspelled. And I know you all can't, but you got to help me with my spelling because it sucks. So now we're going to talk about our top K. Okay, and our top K here, and this might be something that you want to kind of play with, right? So 250, and I believe I got all this from, oh, look at that, remembered. But I don't want to do 7, we're going to do 2. So, and then again, I've talked about it before that these little tooltips are super awesome because I don't have the AI turned on, but I'm using AI. So it's super, super cool. And even though this is tooltips, or, you know, they're not really tooltips for say encoding, but you can look at them like that. I think they're super awesome. It's technically code completion, but that's okay. So it needs to know a stop sequence. And I know you're saying, Tim, where did this come from? I really did a lot of research of looking through, and this is going to be a list. So let's go ahead and just looking through all the documentations, and I think it's like this. And human. Okay, cool. No. We already did that. That's all we want right there. So this can be our stop sequence. So I spent a lot of time looking at the Bodo 3 documentation and looking through the samples and just kind of figuring things out and putting it together. So this can be our body. So we've got our user message that it's going to be passed in. And that's going to be our prompt. We set our tokens to 248. Not really important. I think you can leave this out. Not a big deal because that's going to be the default anyway. Temperature. We want a randomness, so we did it that way. We got our top and our KMP. And so what's next? Best practice, always do a try catch, right? You'll hear me say try catch because what is another language, but in this case we do exception. So just to give it something here to keep us from erroring out, we're just going to lay the foundation and we'll come back and deal with that later. So it wants something, let's see, let's just fill it in. Exception as E, and then let's go ahead and just print this out. I'm trying to think, error. That's fine. That's fine. We'll clean it up later. And then here we want to return nothing because remember we're saying that we have to return. That was the output right here. Remember when I said do this? That's just defining your output, but we're not going to do that. So now this doesn't like these spaces. So we're going to do that. Again, Python is very picky about how it does spaces, but that's why we use something like PyCharm to help us out. Now, here we're going to let's just call this Bedrock. And first thing we got to do is we've got to set up our Bodo client. Now this is where it gets kind of fun. Okay. So we're going to say Bodo, Bedrock, and runtime. Okay. And then from there, we got to set our region. Now that's very important. So look at that. Holy smokes, Batman. It's just because I did it before and it kind of remembers my settings before. But your regions are very important. We talked about that because if it's not accepted in that region, obviously you can't use it, right? So let's go ahead and minimize. Oops, wrong thing. Let's go back to our Python. Boom. And then I use the keyboard a lot, so I'm faster on keyboard than the mouse. So that's why I get kind of slow moving the mouse around. And then there's more settings we want to do here. And we'll do, I think it's a comma, and then config equals, and there's a millions of ways of doing this, and the examples show you that. But we want to set up the Bodo config. Look at that. Well, maybe. First of all, we have an error. And this is not config equals config. This is config equals Bodo config. Right. Oh, I can set it a config settings right here if I wanted to, and then point it to it later. And again, that's in the example, but we're just going to inline it. So config equals Bodo core. That's why we needed the core. Whoops, Bodo, it was there. Core dot config. Okay, and then there we want a connections timeout. Maybe. No, I'm not gonna do connections timeout there. That's kind of cool. It thinks you can because I think you can. That'd be kind of cool. How about a read timeout though? And let's set it way higher than that. Maybe 400. And then retries. Max attempts. It says 0. No, we definitely want some retries. All right, there we go. So again, a lot of this, and we'll see why we'll probably have to clean it up a little bit, but a lot of this came from the Bodo 3 thing, right? Oh, it's here. So if you want to know, just kind of search for it, right? So, oops. So if I go to here, and if I want to know what this is, and what kind of settings I can pass it, I'm just going to use the tooltip. I mean the keyboard, I'm sorry. Then I can do this, click on configurations. Oh, and as you could see, it was actually there. So retries, and there's other things you can do, right? So I think I found that in an examples where that came into play at. Let's do that, configuration. And then, oh yeah, that's what I was saying. So you can set your config, and that's what I thought I was doing at first. So this is where most of that came from, right? So our region, notice the retries is kind of, it's in a dictionary by itself in Python. We call this a dictionary, right? But it looks like JSON for those who don't know Python. So you could actually set that up here and do a config and then set it like a JSON and then have it reference it here in the Bodo core config. So, but we just inlined it. The max attempts, the 200s, again, all that is here if you look. So that's where all this came from, right? Retries. I don't remember what node is, but you can look it up. But if you go through here, you'll see all these settings. And I just kind of picked what was kind of important to me at the moment. So let's see why we have an error. So we got Bedrock equals Bodo 3 client. And I know I could highlight it and it will tell me, but let's look first. So this is the Bedrock runtime. Our region name equals that. And then, first of all, this does not get put into that. So let's delete that. There we go. Now it's perfect. So config, let's see if we can do this for real estate, just for readability, not real estate. And then here we got config, retimeout equals 400, retries max, attempts 3. And since I deleted that one, I need to put it here. And there we go. So that is our reference to the Bedrock client. Now we'll set that up in a few minutes. So now we need to set up our response, and we'll just keep it dummy simple. If you guys know me, I like to use the KISS method. Keep it simple, stupid. So response equals, if I can spell response. Oh, come on, Tim. Okay, and I don't think that's right. No. What we want to do is invoke our model. I got to stop with, I get carried away with those IntelliSense. But let's see, we want to do Bedrock. So there's so much you can do. Invoke. There we go. And now what we want to invoke is actually invoke mode. That's correct, right? Oh, not mode. What am I thinking? We've got it. Come on, Tim. So let's do this because I'm really jacking up. So to do, first thing we're going to do is a reference to the Bodo client. Okay. And then what we've got to do is from there, we've got to do a reference to the model. And then once we do that, then we get our data as JSON. Because remember, it's an API. And then we want to return it. Okay, so that's fine. So now that we have some kind of path, let's see what we've got. So this is invoke model, not mode. Invoke the model. Now, again, you can Google this, but it's really not hard. So body equals, we want the body to equal JSON.dumps, because if you don't know what this is, I'm sorry. But basically this takes our JSON body, which if you notice looks like JSON, but really it's a dictionary, but it's going to read it as it's going to take it in and dump it as a string. So, and then where we at? Dumps, and then the model ID, right? Is that right? Model ID equals, I'm surprised I didn't pop up, but it does notice it's a keyword, so hopefully that's right. Now here we've got to get the model ID. So that's where we come back over here And remember, I said we're going to have to come back to this a few times. We'll just leave that one open, and then we'll open a new one. And then here we'll just say Bedrock and get started. Again, I hate that it always says get started. And then here we can say maybe examples. It's either examples or it's that down there. But you can get this elsewhere too. So here we have our client, our region. So we did that. Our conversation, a little bit different than the way we're doing it now, but that's okay. Our response, this is what we need right here. No, it's not that one we're doing. I'm sorry, we're doing this one. Whoa, that's a large one. What is that? Q&A, I guess. So we need this one. So we need this. Let's make sure I spelled it right. Okay, cool. And notice they have max tokens, sequence stop is human, temperature. So this may be where I got the other one from. But let's just do it. Go back to this. Let's, oh, sorry. And let's make sure I spelled this right, because that one's very important. Okay, cool. So we've got our region and then our model, which is good. Oops, that's not what I wanted. So we've got our name, our region is East 1. Let's make sure that's right, because that was IntelliSense. Let's make sure it's spelled right. US East 1, okay. And then I'm just kind of doing a sanity check. We're creating a config with our timeout at 400 retries, max temps 3. I noticed because it's an API, you kind of want to set these to something a little more realistic, but just because it is an API, you don't want it to time out quickly, okay. And then we have a link to our model. And that is most important, because that's where it knows which model to actually use. Okay, so I think that's all we need for our response. Now on our so the next one's going to be response content, right? Because that's what we call it when it comes to data. When it comes to an API, let's see how close that is. So this would be response. No. What am I doing? I'm missing something here. So let's call it response data. And this is actually going to be, yeah, I'm not thinking clearly. So let's go ahead and put that back. Response content, we have to read in the data. So that's going to be response dot get body read as a method. So that's pretty close. And then let's go ahead and decode it just to be safe, because I don't know what format it may come back as. So we're going to do it as UTF-8. It's just good practice. You don't have to do that. So that should be right. And then, so that's our content. I'm looking at this if you want to know what I'm looking at. So response content, and then we need our data, right? So I like to call that data. And so, which I look at that, it already knows. So we're going to take this and we're going to load this as our JSON into data. So now that looks like a JSON. I'm not sure why it wants me to rename that, but that's okay. Let's see what it says. No, it's okay. So that's going to load it into that. And let's go ahead and get rid of our, let's get rid of our, let's strip it just to keep it clean, because there may be white spaces at the end. So this is going to be data dot, oh. The response actually is a completion, because that's one of the things it comes back as. So completion. And now we can strip it. Okay, cool. I think that's right. We may get some massive errors, but that's okay. So what we're going to do is return the code here. So return, if I can spell return, data. Okay, so wow, what a headache. But I think this is the massive of it. So what we're doing is, as a human, write code for blah. It's going to do the message. The assistant's going to respond, right? And the assistant's going to go out and get its data. So that's its prompt. We're setting these settings to help scope the model. We talked about it. And the stop sequence is going to be our human. Okay. And then here, what we're going to do, we did a reference to Bodo client, and we basically just gave it some parameters, but more importantly, we talked about region. Okay. And then you don't probably have to do these, but you'll get all kind of errors because it may time out. That's why I did that. Just keep that in mind. That's just for timeout purposes. So we get a response. Now this is just using JSON with Python. So if you don't know how to do that, then, you know, ask me maybe, or maybe I'll do a video, but it's very straightforward. So here what we're doing is we're invoking the model, and for the body, we're basically taking this, which looks like JSON, but again, that's a dictionary, and we're going to pass it in as a string to this model. Okay. And then that's going to give us a response. So we want the body of that, and we're going to read it. And of course, we just decode it to that. That's not a big deal. This is just kind of straightforward of how to read it. And the other thing you need to know is just it returns back as a body. Okay. I hope it. Actually, you know, this is wrong. I'm sorry. This will error out. First of all, it's not that. I got to be careful. It is actually body. I was about to say it has to match what's above, not that. Okay. So, okay, that's fine. I'll say match what's above, but right here. Okay. So that's going to read that and then decode it. And then what happens is that gets returned here. So data loads this. Okay. And then the data here, and that's correct. So that is bringing back the completion, which is going to be result. And then what we're going to do with the completion is we're going to strip out the white spaces, and then we're going to return that data. Okay, that's a lot of stuff, right? But it's, you know, it gets you closer. So now the one thing I want to do here, though, let's clean this up a little bit, because we need to return our error message. So we're going to say error was found generating code, and we'll put colon, and then here we can just put again, we can do this as a format, and we can just pass in this. Okay. Yeah. Oh, I gotta put an F in front of this. There we go. Okay, there we go. Perfect. So that's that. Now the next thing we're going to do is probably we've got to save it somewhere, right? So the one thing to think about is we're going to save it to our S3 bucket. We could just make it generic, right? So here, let's put a little save to S3. Let's just work it out until we don't need it anymore. Okay. This is the main method. Okay. And let's just, oops, I'm sorry. I'm missing one, right? Oops, still, da-da. Tim's screwing up. All right, so let's go ahead and close that for now. I don't need to debug. So let's see what we got. This can come out to here because that needs to be a new line, which is there. Notice this is not helpful. It doesn't like, there we go, placement of that. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to say df save to S3. And it doesn't take a message. We've got to put in the name here. So we'll call this the code that we're going to save, and the S3 bucket name. And then we need an S3 bucket key. I'll pin you that one. Okay. And then we'll talk about this and as we build it, just like we did before. Now, this isn't really Lambda. This really isn't Bodo. This is really just saving to an S3 bucket. So no matter what you use, this is going to be correct, right? So first, now the funny thing is, though, it does use, oh, look at that. That's kind of cool. Oh, that's not right, though. It should be client, S3.client, S3. So that's saying let's create a client to the S3. And then what we need to do here, let's do another try exception just to be clean. Let's just steal the one we had up here because we're actually writing out an error up here, and we may have to clean up a little because this says code generation. Maybe something like save to S3. There we go. And now here, let's do this. Ignore the error message for now. It's just a spacing thing. So this actually is, see, it's kind of there, S3 put object, but I'm not doing it as a response. So let's do this. So S3 has a method called put objects. Now I've used S3s before, so this isn't anything new, but I'm just trying to think of the best way to do this one. So we're going to say bucket. Oops, sorry. This is actually bucket. There we go. Let's see how close this was. Bucket, key, and our body. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, that's it. That's all you really need. So here what we're going to say is print code saved to S3. And I could actually get cool and put the bucket name in if we want to. So why not? So whoops, save to, and we'll just do another format here. And we can say, I don't need the key, but we could just say bucket name. There we go, just like that. Okay, cool. And that's good enough. So error was found saving code. How's that? To S3. Okay, good enough for me. Now, that's kind of all we needed for that. So here to establish, so here you just say I'm using the client for S3, and there what we're doing is we're going to create an S3 has a put object. It wants to know what's the bucket name, which we'll create in a few minutes. The key, we'll talk about that in a few minutes, and then the body itself. And the body, of course, is the code that gets passed in. So now what's next? What are we going to do next? Well, now the most important thing is the Lambda. So let's go back over here. And a Lambda has an event. Remember, I have it open over here. So let's just grab this for sake of getting started. And then we'll paste it right there. Okay, cool. So the Lambda has an event and a contents. And if you remember older programming, it's not even older, but we've been doing event handlers for a long time, right? And sorry, I took a drink of my coffee. I did a lot for like in C++ back in the day, and then C#, and as well as Java. So that's what we're doing here. So the problem is this is going to be pretty big. So the first thing we need to do, oops, we'll leave that there. That's kind of cool, but we need to capture our event. And if you remember, our event in this case is JSON, right? Yeah, that's right. Okay, cool. So our event equals the JSON load, so it's going to equal the body. And then we have, we've got to be careful. These have to match these up here. So we need our message and our language type. So our message, we're going to get out of the event. It's going to equal message. And then our language type is going to language type. Now these we're going to pass in through Postman. Okay, so let's just say values get passed in through API. Because it doesn't matter if you use Postman or what you use, but in this case we are. And I'm using these type of comments instead of the basic ones. So this is a to-do comment, right? And a basic comment is just a comment with a pound. But when you do the 3, sometimes there's some tools out there that can pick that up and help you with your logging and put it in your README files. So you'd want to get more defined, but for me, that's okay for now. And then let's just test our message, right? So print, that's fine. No, print. What do we print? Let's go ahead. Yeah. Print message first, then event type. Okay. And let's just, yeah, that's fine. Because I could just do this too. I think this will work. Because the message is going to put a little space in there. The reason that's because the comma, I can't do a plus. I could create another object and put it in there, but because I'm using it this format, it wants 2 separate ones. And you can do 3, 4, whatever. So now what we're going to do is we got to call our generated code method, which is here. And we've got to get that back. Okay, so that's going to be, we'll call it gen code. Well, it's smart enough to know. But I need it back in a variable. So we're going to say gen code equals that. Yes. Okay. Now, is that right? Yeah, that's right. Okay, cool. So what this is doing is the event is going to get the data, and we're parsing the data here. And then, again, that's a dictionary or a JSON, however you want to read it. Again, a JSON in Python is a dictionary, right? And if you think about JSON, it really is just a dictionary. So it's a key column value, right? Or key value. So, and then we're taking the message out of that, and we're taking the language type out of that. That's how we're doing. Here we're writing it to the screen, so we can see. All right, until, you know, this should be written to logs, if I'm not mistaken. And now we want to call the method, and we're going to pass in the message and this language type that got captured through our API. So now, if we want to make sure it's valid, so if that is just true, basically no error, then let's set our time. Time equals time date now. Let's actually format this. Date now to string time, and we want it string anyway, so we need it to be, you shouldn't know this because this is very old school, but hour, and then minute, well, and then second, I'm sorry, so it showed up. Okay, so cool. That's going to give us a time reference. And then our S3 key, we need to set here. So I'm just going to set it blank for now because we need to go create that. And we need our S3 bucket, which we haven't created yet. Okay. And then we're going to call our save to S3 by passing that in. So the gen code is here, and our S3 bucket is here, and our key is there. I feel like there's a way to clean that up because I'm no, I'm sorry. So this is the message that's being passed in as the code. Okay, so it's there, and then our key, and we're going to parse the key as part of the naming here. And then let's think. Okay, so let's go create our bucket. Let's do that.